My name is Walter Hargrove. I'm a 63-year-old retired mechanic living in a modest home just outside of Asheville, North Carolina. Life's been quiet since my wife passed 5 years ago. I have one daughter, Rachel, my pride and joy growing up. She was smart, kind, and had this glow about her that made me believe she could light up any room. And for a while she did. But ever since she married Carter Langston, things have changed. Carter's a corporate hotshot from a wealthy family up north. Polished shoes, expensive suits, always talking about stock options and quarterly earnings, things I never cared much for. I never held his world against him, but I could tell from the start that he looked down on me. Maybe not always in words, but in glances, silences, the way he'd smirk when I talked about rebuilding an engine or growing tomatoes in my backyard. Rachel changed too, bit by bit, piece by piece, until I felt like a stranger in her new curated world. Then came Father's Day. I had been looking forward to it. Rachel had promised she'd stop by with a surprise. So I mowed the lawn, cooked her favorite peach cobbler, and even put on the blue button-up she gave me 3 Christmases ago. I waited on the porch, sipping sweet tea and watching the afternoon sun stretch across the grass. When their SUV finally pulled into the driveway, I smiled like a fool. Rachel stepped out, looking stunning as always. Carter followed in his designer polo, holding something behind his back. "Hey Dad," Rachel called, waving as she walked up. I hugged her tight. "You look beautiful, baby." She handed me a small square envelope wrapped with a silver ribbon. "Happy Father's Day, Dad," she said, her voice breezy. Carter chimed in, "Hope it brings you luck." I opened the envelope slowly, feeling the eyes of my daughter and her husband on me. Inside was a single scratch-off lottery ticket, one of those flashy, oversized ones you see near gas station registers. "A lottery ticket," I said, trying to mask the confusion with a smile. "It's fun," Rachel laughed. "Who knows, maybe you'll hit the jackpot." I chuckled lightly. "Sure, maybe." Then I saw Carter pull out another envelope, a thick one, and hand it to his father, who had come along for the visit. "Happy Father's Day, Dad," he said with warmth. His father opened the envelope, revealing a luxury cruise package to the Mediterranean. First class, all-inclusive, 10 nights. I stood there frozen. Rachel didn't even blink. Neither did Carter. His father laughed, wrapping them both in a hug. "You kids are unbelievable." I felt something twist in my gut, something old and familiar, like the feeling of being left out in the cold. I nodded and stepped back, pretending I had to check the barbecue. Inside, I scratched the lottery ticket. It was a loser. Of course it was. But in that moment, I made myself a promise. I wasn't going to forget this, and I wasn't going to forgive it either. That night, after the family left and silence wrapped itself around my home like a heavy wool blanket, I sat in my recliner, staring at the losing ticket still clutched in my hand. Not out of hope, just disbelief. I wasn't angry, not exactly. I'd long accepted I wasn't part of Rachel's new world. But being handed a lottery ticket while another man got a cruise from the same child I raised, that wasn't just a disappointment. It was humiliation. I tossed the ticket on the coffee table and poured myself a bourbon, 2 fingers neat. The quiet hum of the ceiling fan and the distant chirping of cicadas were my only companions as I tried to shake the bitter taste in my mouth. I knew Carter never liked me, but I hadn't realized just how little respect he had for me until that moment. And Rachel, I didn't want to believe she went along with it, but she had, willingly. The next morning, I was still restless, so I went to the gas station down the road to grab some coffee and clear my head. As I waited in line, I saw a fresh display of scratch-off tickets, different from the one Rachel gave me. They had this bright red and gold design with Mega Fortune printed in bold, blocky letters. Something about them caught my eye. On a whim, I bought two. Back home, I made breakfast and sat down to scratch them off at the kitchen table, expecting nothing. The first ticket, nothing. The second, 3 matching symbols. I blinked, then looked again. The symbols were flashing, 3 volts. I flipped the ticket over, checking the prize chart. $120 million jackpot. I couldn't breathe. I reread it a dozen times. I checked the rules again. I turned the ticket over and stared at the tiny print like my life depended on it. Then I called the lottery office in Raleigh. The woman on the other end confirmed the ticket was real. They'd need to verify it in person. But yes, I had just won. I sat there in stunned silence. It wasn't even the money that hit me first. It was the timing. The day after I was tossed a lottery ticket as a joke, I had actually won the real thing. The irony was so sharp, it made me laugh out loud, startling my dog, Rusty. And that laugh quickly turned into something else. Something darker, something determined. They had given me a losing ticket, like I was some pitiful old man clinging to hope. Now I had $120 million. And I had no intention of telling them. Not yet. No, I had something better in mind. I was going to teach them a lesson they'd never forget. But first I had to plan carefully. Because when you have that kind of money, the power shift is quiet, but deadly. I didn't rush to claim the winnings publicly. I consulted a financial advisor first, someone highly recommended and discreet. His name was Anthony Myers, a seasoned professional based out of Charlotte who handled wealth management for old money families and retired athletes. He didn't blink when I told him the amount. Instead, he nodded, scribbled notes and said, "We'll move carefully. Quiet wealth is the safest kind." And that was exactly what I needed. Silence. Together we created a trust. My name was nowhere visible on the public documents. The winning ticket was processed through a legal firm Anthony worked with. By the time the check was cut, it was made out to a private holding company we'd established, L&R Ventures, L for Luke, my name, and R for Rusty, my old Labrador, now resting peacefully under the oak tree in the backyard. Even in wealth, I didn't want to forget the simple things. While the lawyers and accountants did their thing, I didn't change much on the outside. I still lived in my modest home just outside Asheville, drove my aging F-150, and kept mowing my own lawn. But inwardly, I was transforming. For the first time in decades, I didn't feel like a relic in my own family. I wasn't a burden. I wasn't an afterthought. I was a man with power and a plan. My daughter Rachel hadn't called since Father's Day. Not once. No check-in. No thanks for coming. Carter, of course, was likely too busy polishing his golf clubs or reviewing spreadsheets to even remember I existed. But they were about to learn something important about the old man they'd written off. I started making quiet investments. First, I bought a few commercial properties in Raleigh, ones Carter's company had failed to close on last year due to financing issues. I purchased them anonymously through a shell company. Then I began acquiring shares of a regional tech firm, one Carter's hedge fund had recently started investing in. Let's just say, he was about to discover that the man slowly eating up his territory wasn't some Wall Street hotshot. It was me. But I didn't want financial revenge alone. No, I needed something personal, something poetic, something that would sting the way their cruelty had stung me. That's when the idea struck. Rachel and Carter were planning their dream vacation in late August, a European cruise departing from New York. It was their big splurge for the year, paid for partially by the bonus Carter had gotten after laying off several long-time employees. I decided to give them a vacation to remember, but first I needed to build the trap and let them walk right into it. Late July rolled in with its sticky heat and slow southern afternoons, but my days were anything but lazy. Every hour felt calculated, strategic. I spent mornings with Anthony finalizing the paperwork on a new acquisition, a boutique luxury cruise line headquartered out of New Orleans. It wasn't huge, only 3 mid-sized ships and 1 executive yacht, but it was profitable and, more importantly, perfectly timed. Why? Because Rachel and Carter had booked their dream vacation with that very company. They were set to sail on the Elysian Star, departing from Pier 8 in Manhattan, a 14-day itinerary winding through Italy, Spain, and the French Riviera. The kind of trip they flaunted on social media with hashtags like #LivingOurBestLife and #earned not given. Well, they were about to learn the meaning of earned. 2 weeks before departure, I became the silent owner of the parent company. I didn't announce it. I didn't change the management. I simply added 1 clause to the ship's VIP guest policy, giving the owner the right to be notified and approve all upgrades, room assignments, and onboard experiences for selected clients. Guess who I flagged? Mr. and Mrs. Carter Langston. But instead of luxury, they were about to experience a little technical error. Their oceanfront suite mysteriously vanished from the booking system and was reassigned to another guest, a very grateful elderly couple celebrating their 50th anniversary. Meanwhile, Carter and Rachel were regretfully downgraded to an interior cabin below deck, right next to the mechanical room. No windows, no view, just the constant hum of engines. When they arrived at the port, dressed to the nines, Rachel in her oversized sunglasses and Carter in his monogrammed blazer, I watched from a distance. I'd flown up that morning and rented a small hotel room overlooking the dock. Binoculars in hand, I saw their confusion turn to irritation. Then Rachel stomped toward the check-in counter. Her arms flailed. Carter demanded a manager, but all they got was a quiet apology and a printed confirmation, signed and sealed, with no refunds available. Their only option: take the downgrade or lose the entire trip. They boarded in silence, their smiles wiped clean. And me? I sipped my coffee and chuckled. Later that evening, I had a gift delivered to their room. A small, elegant box. Inside it was a silver keychain engraved with a simple message: "Hope the view inside is as breathtaking as you imagined, Dad." I imagined Carter's face, tight with confusion and rage. Rachel staring at the keychain, probably unsure if it was a prank or some twisted coincidence. They would never guess how deep the setup ran. But I was just getting started. This wasn't revenge for the cruise ticket. This was about years, decades of being treated like wallpaper, the forgotten father, the family joke. Now I was the one with the punchline, and they were just beginning to taste it. Summer faded into early fall, and with it came the annual tradition my daughter had kept alive since college, the September family reunion barbecue. Normally hosted in our backyard, this year she offered to throw it at her place. Plenty of space, she had texted weeks prior. Plus, Carter wants to grill. I replied with a thumbs up emoji. Nothing more. By now they were home from their cruise. Their social media had gone suspiciously quiet. No sunset selfies, no fine dining reels. I assumed their memories of that cramped interior cabin weren't worth sharing. Good. The morning of the reunion, I dressed in jeans and a crisp polo, keeping things casual. I stopped by a bakery and picked up a tray of cherry cobbler, my late wife's favorite, and Rachel's as a girl. I wondered if she even remembered. When I arrived, the backyard was already buzzing with cousins, nieces, nephews, and neighbors. Laughter rang out from the patio. Kids chased each other on the lawn. Carter was manning the grill in his Grill King apron, beer in hand, trying to look the part of the perfect host. "Dad," Rachel greeted me, giving me a quick side hug. "You made it." "Of course," I said, my eyes meeting hers with a calm smile. "Wouldn't miss it." She didn't look me in the eyes for long. I greeted everyone else, exchanged small talk, and sat near the garden wall under the shade of a magnolia tree. I observed Carter closely. There was a tension in his movements, a twitch in his jaw, a stiffness in how he flipped the burgers. He was still rattled, still unsure. Perfect. Midway through lunch, Rachel stood and clinked her glass. "Everyone, quick announcement before we eat." She smiled wide, placing a hand on Carter's back. "Carter's been promoted. He's officially Senior Account Director at Phoenix Strategies. Big pay bump, big title." Everyone clapped, and Carter nodded smugly. I sipped my iced tea and leaned back, letting the moment pass. They thought I'd be impressed, but just as the applause faded, I stood up, calmly, confidently. "While we're sharing news," I said, my voice even, "I'd like to make an announcement too." All eyes turned to me. Rachel tilted her head, curious. Carter frowned slightly. "I recently finalized a purchase, a controlling interest in Phoenix Strategies," I said, slipping my phone from my pocket. "Effective last Friday." Silence. "Which means," I continued, eyes locking with Carter's, "I technically outrank the Senior Account Director." "Funny how that works, huh?" Gasps. A few chuckles. My nephew dropped his soda. Rachel's face drained of color. "You're joking," Carter said, trying to laugh it off. I held up my phone and tapped the screen, displaying the ownership summary page with my name in bold. "No joke." Carter's hand tightened around his drink. Rachel opened her mouth, but no words came. I placed the phone down and bit into a deviled egg. That promotion, it was approved by the former board. "We'll be reviewing all leadership changes next week, including yours, Carter." He dropped the spatula. The quiet was deafening. A family of blue jays chirped from the fence, as if to fill the silence. I smiled. Sometimes revenge isn't loud. Sometimes it's just well-timed truth. That Monday morning, the mood at Phoenix Strategies was tense, to say the least. I walked through the glass doors of the corporate office in downtown Charlotte, like I belonged there because now I did. The receptionist stood up immediately. "Mr. Gaines?" "Good morning," I said, offering a polite nod. "Just here for a few meetings." I had no intention of disrupting the company's operations. This wasn't about humiliation. It was about control and accountability. I met with the remaining board members in a closed-door session. Carter wasn't invited. Not yet. An internal audit had already been triggered. I wanted to understand what had happened before and after Carter's arrival, and where the funds had gone. I wasn't surprised when the finance team flagged several anomalies tied to executive spending, expensive retreats, misclassified travel costs, and unusually generous bonuses to one person, Carter Hayes, the same man who had smugly called me old school over dinner last Thanksgiving. Later that day, I scheduled a formal review of Carter's position and invited him to the office. He showed up in a navy suit, trying to mask his nerves, but I saw it. the sweat at his temples, the stiffness in his posture. "You wanted to see me?" he asked, sitting across from me. "I did," I replied calmly, sliding a folder across the table. "These are expense reports under your name. Care to explain the pattern?" He flipped through the documents, his face paling with each page. "These were approved by HR," he stammered. "They were rubber-stamped without full oversight." I corrected. "That changes now." Carter tried to laugh. "You're making a big deal over a few bonuses." "No," I said firmly. "I'm calling out a breach of trust and misuse of company funds." He looked ready to argue, but I stopped him with a glance. "Effective immediately, your role is suspended pending further review," I said. "There will be no severance, and your company accounts are frozen." His mouth hung open. "You can't do that." I just did. He stood, fists clenched. "This is personal." "No," I said, standing to meet his gaze. "This is professional. You made it personal when you threw away my years of service for a corner office and a cruise ticket." For a long second we stared at each other, two men from different generations, now standing on opposite sides of power. Carter turned and stormed out of the room without another word. I exhaled slowly and looked out the window, watching the city traffic move below. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about cleaning house and finally getting the respect I had been denied. The weeks that followed were like watching a collapsing structure in slow motion. The internal audit uncovered more than I'd expected. Not just Carter's luxury travel bills, but phantom consulting contracts, double-paid vendor invoices, and even kickbacks disguised as marketing incentives. And every trail seemed to lead back to one office. His. The new CFO, a sharp and no-nonsense woman named Natalie Cruz, met with me every morning to go over findings. He used shell companies, fake vendors, and even rerouted bonus structures, she explained, shaking her head in disbelief. "I've seen fraud before, but this was deliberate. Strategic. It made me sick. Not because of the money, but because I had once invited Carter to dinner at my house. I'd poured him bourbon, introduced him to my daughter, told stories from my early career like he was the son I never had. And he used all of that to bleed the company dry. I kept my temper in check. Revenge, I reminded myself, wasn't about shouting or slamming fists. It was about consequence and dignity. My daughter Caroline called one evening. "Dad, I heard," she said quietly, "about Carter." She hadn't said his name since the divorce. "Yeah," I replied. "You doing okay?" There was a long pause. I can't believe how blind I was." "No," I told her. "You believed in someone who fooled us both. That's not blindness. That's trust. And it's not your fault." She cried a little on the other end of the line. "What are you going to do with him?" "I already did it," I said softly. Truth was, Carter wasn't just suspended. He'd been reported to the authorities. Fraud that large doesn't stay private. And I had submitted all findings to the IRS and SEC. Natalie told me, "He's being investigated under corporate fraud statutes. It's likely he'll do time." That didn't thrill me, but I slept better knowing justice would come not in vengeance, but in law. One afternoon I visited the office Carter once occupied. The desk was bare, no photographs, no memorabilia, just cold space. I opened a drawer and found one thing left behind, a leather notebook. Inside were pages of scribbles, figures, projections, arrogant notes. But at the back there was a scribbled quote, "The smartest men always find a way to stay on top." I closed the notebook quietly and walked away. He might have thought he was smart, but character, not cleverness, is what sustains success. And Carter Hayes had none. Word spread like wildfire. Local news stations picked up the story first. Rising tech executive under investigation for multi-million-dollar fraud. Then the business outlets joined in. One article from a well-known publication headlined, "From Boardroom Star to Federal Target, the Carter Hayes Scandal." I didn't make a statement. I didn't need to. The press had enough from the federal filings and the company's official release. My silence spoke louder than anything I could have said. What amazed me was how quickly his admirers turned. The same execs who once toasted Carter in luxury rooftop lounges were now deleting his contact information. Board members who championed his vision now shook their heads in shame. And his new fiancée, the one he had flaunted after divorcing my daughter, she vanished the day the indictment dropped. I won't lie. It felt like poetic justice. But even then, part of me wondered how things had gone so wrong. I remembered Carter as the young intern, eager to learn, hungry for success. Somewhere along the way, ambition turned into greed, and that greed became his compass. The day of his arrest, I watched the footage on a muted TV in my office. He was escorted out of a luxury condo in handcuffs, shielding his face from the cameras. Behind him, agents carried out boxes of files. His tailored suit looked too small suddenly. His once perfect smile was gone. I didn't cheer. I didn't even smirk. Because it wasn't just about Carter falling. It was about what we lost along the way. Trust, pride, stability. My daughter lost a marriage. My company lost years of potential growth. And I lost the belief that I could see the good in people. Later that evening, Natalie stopped by my office. "We've frozen all accounts connected to him," she said. "Recovery is underway. It'll take time, but we're stabilizing." I nodded slowly. "Good. That's all I wanted." She hesitated, then added, "And the board wants to reinstate you formally as chairman. They say the company needs your leadership to rebuild trust." I stared at her, then leaned back in my chair. After everything, they still wanted me to lead. I thought about it, thought about what that would mean. The hours, the pressure, the constant eyes. But more than that, I thought about my legacy. Not just the story of how I was taken down, but how I rebuilt what was mine. "Tell them I'll think about it," I said. And I meant it, because sometimes revenge isn't just about watching someone fall. It's about rising higher than you were before and doing it on your own terms. The days that followed Carter's arrest were oddly still. There was no press outside my house, no barrage of phone calls, just a peaceful kind of silence, one I hadn't felt in years. It was a Tuesday morning when my daughter Claire dropped by unexpectedly. She held a bag of fresh bagels in one hand and her usual large coffee in the other. There was something different about her, less tension in her shoulders, more calm in her voice. "I thought we could eat breakfast together," she said. I welcomed her inside, and we sat in the sunroom where her mother used to read every morning. The sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting warm stripes on the table. She didn't bring up Carter. Not at first. We talked about small things, work, the garden, her favorite hiking spot upstate. But eventually, she glanced down at her cup and whispered, "He called me." I stayed quiet, waiting. He wanted to apologize, said he made a mistake, that he thought success would fix everything inside him. She looked up, her eyes clearer than I'd seen them in months. I told him I wasn't the one he needed to apologize to. A weight lifted from my chest. "That's a powerful thing to say," I replied. Claire smiled faintly. "You always told me that people show you who they are when things fall apart." I didn't believe it back then, but now I do. We clinked our mugs together like a toast to resilience, to hard lessons, to surviving things we never thought we'd face. Later that day, I visited the construction site of our new foundation's headquarters, an initiative I'd quietly started before the scandal even broke. It would house programs for young professionals, veterans returning to civilian life, and displaced workers seeking new paths. I wanted to build something good again, not just for myself, but for the community Carter almost helped destroy. Natalie met me there with a folder of finalized permits. She looked around the site and said, "Funny how this place used to be nothing but dirt and weeds. And now?" I asked. "Now it's becoming something meaningful," she said. "Kind of like you." I didn't respond, but I felt it. The shift. I wasn't a victim anymore. I wasn't even angry. I had turned the wreckage into something rooted in purpose. And as the sun set over the steel beams and gravel, I realized something important. Real revenge isn't about destruction. It's about rebuilding, stronger, smarter, and more grounded than before. 3 months after the dust had settled, I stood on the auditorium stage of the newly opened Legacy Outreach Center. The building gleamed with promise. Glass panels reflecting the golden autumn sky, the American flag swaying just outside in the crisp breeze. Claire sat in the front row, beaming. Natalie was beside her, clipboard in hand, nodding at the small army of volunteers organizing the event. Behind them, hundreds of people had gathered, veterans, single parents, unemployed workers, all now finding hope through programs funded by my quiet $120 million windfall. Today was more than a ribbon-cutting ceremony. It was redemption on my terms. I stepped to the podium, heart steady. "I stand before you not as a man who won the lottery," I began, "but as someone who was given a second chance, not to live rich, but to live right." A quiet murmur of approval rolled through the room. Some people saw a windfall and expected me to waste it. Others, some in my own family, treated me like I didn't matter until money entered the picture. But here's the thing, I paused, scanning the audience. Money doesn't change who you are. It only reveals who you've been all along. Applause followed, not thunderous, but warm and genuine. After the ceremony, a familiar face approached. Carter. He looked thinner, older. His designer jacket was replaced by a simple navy sweater. Behind him stood no entourage, no flashy car, just him. "I heard you were speaking today," he said. I crossed my arms. "You didn't need to come." "I did," he admitted. "Not for you. For Claire. She asked me to apologize again in person." He held out his hand. I looked at it, then back at his eyes. "No," I said. "You don't get a handshake. Not until you prove you've changed." He nodded. "Fair." We stood there for a moment, two men who once shared the same family, and now barely a thread between them. He turned to leave, but I called out, "One more thing." He turned back. "You took my place once, Carter. In my daughter's life, in the family business, in the seat next to my wife at dinner. But when you were tested, when the truth came out, you vanished. I'm still here," I added, tapping my chest. "And that's the difference." He said nothing, just walked away, swallowed by the crowd. That night, Claire and I sat in my backyard, under string lights we'd hung together. She handed me a folded piece of paper, a Father's Day card she'd never given me. Inside it read, "To the only man who never gave up on me, even when others tried to take your place. Thank you for showing me what strength, forgiveness, and real love look like." Tears welled in my eyes, not from pain, but from peace. That $120 million never bought me happiness, but it gave me the power to build something real, something permanent. Revenge wasn't fire and fury. It was quiet, strategic, complete, And best of all, it was mine.